Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoy video. Jonas and Ryan here, getting back to the faction focuses this week. I'm actually really impressed with ourselves that we've been this regular, even though we had to skip yesterday because I was busy. I don't know if Jonas, you were busy last night too, but we're making up for it with two reviews today. We're doing Tzeentch and Ogres back to back, although there'll be two separate videos. What do you? I mean, are you as impressed with our pace as I am?
Yeah, I'm happy we're pulling it off so far.
Yeah, I mean, the question is it sustainable? Because we've still got, I think we've seen four last week and four thus far this week, so that's eight out of 24. So we're only one third of the way through. You think we'll be able to keep up this pace in the next 4 weeks?
Maybe. We'll have to
Okay.
see.
Let's see. Yeah. All right. So, guys, before we get started, just a friendly reminder to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons and do all the good YouTube stuff. Join us in the Discord and keep the buzz going about all of these awesome faction focus articles we keep getting. So, without further ado, let's get to those battle traits for Tzeentch. All right. So, Jonas, you've played a good bit against Tzeentch, right? It's probably one of the more played against armies you've had, considering you and Michael play a good bit,
Yeah,
right?
KO, Stormcast, and Tzeentch are my regular armies I play against.
Okay, and so one of the big things that stayed here that maybe I'm a little surprised about. I was actually asking our guest from the tier list video we made a while ago, Huko, what if I saw him at a tournament this past weekend, and asked him if he thought the Destiny dice would stay, and he was convinced they would. And here we are. Are you surprised at all that they're basically still in the same shape they were before?
Not much, no. I kind of expect that they would stay. They're such a core part of what Tzeentch is, and makes it makes it feel like you're actually playing with your Destiny. So it makes sense. Just going on what the lore is for the army.
Yeah. So, I mean, the only things that they really took out of this list down below, first off, let's talk about what it is, just for people that don't know. At the beginning of the game, basically, each player rolls 9 dice and then doesn't touch those dice until they need to use them for this ability. And whatever they end up being is what you've got. Let's say you got two twos, four fours, and some other combo of maybe a six or two in there. You can use those dice to not replace, but instead of rolling for one of the things listed below, you can use it for that. So a casting roll, you have to use both dice for that casting roll. You can't just replace one of them. Same thing with unbinding, banishment. It's been changed to banishment in this list, but of course it was always dispelling. So that's just a kind of one-for-one replacement there. Run rolls, charge rolls, but they specify in your turn, which is great because the counter charge that's guaranteed is just annoying as hell.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. Hit rolls, wound rolls, save rolls, and then they took away variable. I want to say they was attacks in there. No, just variable damage characteristic. Like let's say you roll D3 for your damage characteristic, you can no longer control that with a Destiny dice. But I don't know how much people were actually using that. Of these, which ones did you see get used the most often?
Casting with the bird.
Yep.
That was quite a popular one. Save rolls as well, definitely.
Yeah, and I think even better for a lot of people is getting those charges because it guarantees some unit that maybe needed a 12-inch charge.
Yeah.
It's getting in there if you got two sixes.
Mm-hmm.
Huko uses it all the time, and again, it's good that it's not counterchargeable or usable in the countercharge command ability of your
Yeah.
opponents.
Yeah, I guess I just haven't played against melee Tzeentch quite as much as I have played against ranged Tzeentch.
Sure, fair enough. Yeah, and then of course magic
Mm-hmm.
stuff in general.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is basically what it is. They still cannot replace rerolls. They still count as unmodified rolls and can't be changed or modified in any way apart from your opponent's abilities.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically the same thing they were before. Very strong ability, very Tzeentch. But the rest of the abilities that we see on this page are totally new. Now, Jonas, how do you want to pronounce this word? I can imagine two different pronunciations that people are
The
probably going
weird
to lean.
flame.
You want to go with weird? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking word, but
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
weird. Yeah, probably is what they're going with. Not wired, probably.
No, I think it's a reference to some old lore, right? Like medieval lore where it's spelled weird with a Y.
Sure, and but then the question is, what was the official pronunciation way back then?
Fair enough.
I don't know, but yeah, let's go with weird.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. So basically, to sum this up for someone who doesn't want to read everything too long, didn't read, it's basically a Tzeentch version of the mortal wounds that Nurgle gets to do.
Yeah.
It's all three of these are basically describing how someone gets a burning keyword, what happens if they have the burning keyword, and how they get rid of it, basically. So starting from the top, once per turn, the Tzeentch player in any shooting phase, so you could do this 10 times, I guess, you pick an enemy unit that had any damage points allocated this turn by either a Weird Flame spell, which we haven't seen an example yet of, if I'm not mistaken, or shooting attacks made with weapons that have the Weird Flame weapon ability, which we'll see is on the horrors in this later in this article, and is almost definitely on all the flamers and maybe some heroes here and there.
Yeah.
So you only get to pick one enemy unit. So even if you split your shots, you're not getting to put this on more than one per turn. And so you're handing out that burning keyword. Now that they're burning, so if we look at the next ability, at once per turn at the end of any turn, so even your opponent's turn, you are rolling for every single enemy unit, a D3. On a 2 or 3, it takes mortal damage equal to the roll, and on a 1, it loses the burning keyword, so the flames go out. And then there's a passive ability that if one of these units that has the burning a keyword on it would try to either heal that unit or return slain models, instead of getting to do either one of those, it's eaten up as they have to get rid of the burning keyword. So if you tried to rally, remember, a rally is an ability. So even if you rolled like 6 4-ups, you don't get to, for your first wound healed, get to take the burning keyword away and then get to do the rest of the ability. You just use the whole rally to get rid of burning. So it's basically forced, even though everyone's got access to rally unless they're outside of combat, it's basically forcing someone to use up what they would have used to heal and or bring models back to just get rid of this keyword and stop doing more mortal wounds. We haven't seen a whole lot of interaction with this, but there is a formation. Maybe let's just scroll to the formation since we're on the topic. So it's basically the probably the equivalent of the Eternal Conflagration that we had before, where in addition to all the things we just said about burning units, all burning units just all the time have -1 on their wound rolls for all attacks, including shooting and melee attacks. So obviously, that's not in play if you're taking one of the other 3 formations. But seeing what we've seen thus far, how are you feeling about this rule?
I'm a little bit torn on it, to be honest. I like it from a lore perspective. I think it's cool that you set units ablaze. I just wish it didn't feel as much as a Nurgle ability. It is so alike, and it really makes me wonder if Nurgle retains its ability where it deals with the disease points.
Yeah.
What's the difference here? You know, is it just a chaos thing now, chaos god thing, where the 4 chaos gods, well, 4 of the 5 now,
Yeah.
are dealing mortal wounds at the end of a phase or something like that? I just really feel like they could have come up with something more interesting for Tzeentch.
Yeah, I mean, as an Internal Conflag fanboy, I'm happy enough to have this, and I like that it's going. It shows that we're probably leaning towards Flamers as being decent again. But I'm biased in this case. I kind of think it's weird that half of this page is really revolving around one rule.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Um, I mean, what would it be instead? What kind of idea would you have liked to have seen?
Yeah, just something that really emphasizes their magic potency.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of times Tzeentch sits in a weird place in the meta because there are a lot of builds. Like you just said, you don't really play against the combat build. And there's the shooting build, but then there's just the like tanking with lots of like horrors, or at least as it
Yeah,
currently looks
yeah.
in 3.0, and then magic. But the magic tends to only have an 18-inch range, so that gets set out pretty easily. They've got a lot of hard counters when they have to lean into just one of those styles. So by trying to, like the rest of the armies and what we've seen in the faction focuses, trying to kind of make them more mixed arms-y. Now it's like, okay, let's say you do a magic build, and that's great. Now you just probably want to have at least one unit that's putting word flame out, right? Weird flame, I mean. So I don't know. If taken into the whole of what we lost, I mean, we lost a -1 to hit bubble in melee for demon units wholly within 12 inches of a demon hero. I don't really care that we lost that. That's fine. We also lost, well, the big thing we lost, I'll get back to in a sec. The transform to spawn rule wasn't really a rule. It was more just how to deal with almost
Yeah.
every instance of turning into a spawn except how the sigil worked. But now it's moved somewhere else, so we still have it. But and then you might say, well, what about fate dice? Or sorry, fate points, where every time you cast, you get one, and every time you opponent. Well, that used to feed into summoning, right?
Yeah.
So as something that fed into summoning, you say, well, where's summoning gone?
Nobody knows. It's gone.
Yeah. Well, if we scroll down, we can actually see. Let's scroll down just quick to the below the transformed into spawn spell. Okay, so if we look right below the transform to spawn rule, we're kind of bouncing around here, but I think it's logical order, because we're talking about losing the summoning, and they have a whole text here that says there is no summoning units from nothing. That's a weird sentence. There is no summoning units from nothing in the new edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, in order to reduce the need for extra miniatures beyond your initial army list. Instead, recycling destroyed units with powerful abilities is the order of the day. The Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch is designed specifically for this purpose, as it is set up in reserve and unleashed straight into combat by the transform to spawn spell.
Yep.
And let's keep going, just because I still feel like it's a little hard to wrap my head around exactly how this is going to be implemented. It says also, once your Chaos Spawn has been cut down by its former allies, you can instead use the same spell to revive a dead Chaos Spawn. Ordinarily, destroyed units can only be replaced once per battle. The Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch is an exception. It can come back as many times as you want, thanks to its waves of mutation ability. And if we scroll down to that, which is obviously on its war scroll, each friendly Chaos Spawn of Tzeentch unit can be replaced any number of times. So this is bringing a whole bunch of kind of questions into play, especially when we look at the spell. But before we look at the spell, let's just talk about what we've read thus far. First off, summoning is gone in all of the summoning armies. That would probably be Seraphon too, I'm assuming.
Yep.
So it's not the 4 Chaos Gods. What do you feel about that, especially given their explanation here that they were trying to make it so that you don't have to bring a whole boatload of miniatures with you, and then what you see is what you get?
Yeah, I still haven't really decided fully what I think about it. I do think it's better for the game as a whole. There was one edition at one point in the game. There was an edition where where something worked as it is now, or as it is going to be. Like you had to buy the units that you wanted to summon, and it felt really bad. And it was only the case for undead, I think, back then. That you had to buy your zombies, and then you could summon those zombies after you bought them. And it just felt very, very bad to do so with a spell, because if you didn't get your spell off, or your caster died, your zombies were just gone and you paid for them still. And I think it's kind of going to be like that, from what I can tell from certain war scrolls so far. So yeah, if it is like that, I don't necessarily like it very much, unless there's a guarantee way you can at least bring in your summon stuff. But then I'm like, okay, so the summoning is basically a weaker version of teleporting in your stuff from reserve.
Yeah.
And why do armies need to get punished that way? I don't know.
Well, I mean, if we kind of expand this to the other Chaos Gods, one thing that people often said about Slaanesh especially was that they were paying the sins for their summoning mechanic, and that all of the units had to be costed on the basis of that ability. So now the costing is going to be a lot easier to balance, I think, knowing that you can't just bring anything in. Now, I guess, like you were kind of just saying, it sounds like if you want to bring a Chaos Spawn, you actually have to pay its points, then it's in reserve, and then you can summon it. But then in its transform to spawn wording for the spell here, which it basically says it does. It's basically the spell that was on the Magisters before. It does D3 mortal damage, and then any models, if any models are slain, you can pick a friendly chaos spawn of Tzeentch unit that is in reserve as a potential fate or that has been destroyed. If you pick one that was as a potential fate, you can set it up on the battlefield in combat with that target that died. If you picked a unit that has been destroyed, set up an identical replacement on the battlefield in combat with the target. So this is weird because it's, I guess it says somewhere on his war scroll what as a potential fate is, which is a weird bold text there.
I mean, it's just a classical bold text that they do now for putting units in reserve. And now when you put something in reserve, it's reserved in a certain kind of way. And that's always bolded. So in this case, it's just bolted as a potential fate.
No, I agree with you. What I mean is, this is referring to a rule that it's not establishing the rule, it's referring to it.
Yeah, fair.
Which means it's either on his war scroll or it's somewhere else in the index that we haven't seen. And I'm also wondering if is it just the chaos spawn that is a potential fate target, or is it, and obviously by this spell, yes, but I mean in terms of quote unquote summoning, are other units like we've seen the pink horrors, and you can't summon them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering how extensive that list is of things that are going to have this as a potential fate mechanic.
Yeah, I think the goal overall with the summoning is that you're gonna want your units to die and then resummon them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
that's how undead have worked the past edition, right? And you could also only just bring those units back once.
Yeah, except some of these sound like that you put them in reserve right off the beginning, and then then you have to trigger them some other way. I don't know. It's weird. I think we need to see the full system to have a more thorough opinion on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to see how the sigil works, if it also does this, or if they just change what it does entirely, because it used to generate chaos spawns as well. So, all right. And then one other thing that's worth pointing out here that they mentioned under the Arcana and Incantations just above this is that Tzeentch is one of the only factions in the indexes that gets 2 spell lores to choose from, but you can only choose one. So I'm curious if Lumineth's one of the other ones, or Seraphon I can imagine being one of them. Their reason being that Tzeentch is the god of magic, and that probably the other ones would only apply to similarly magical armies. What do you think the chances are that Lumineth and Seraphon get extra lores?
Seraphon, I can see happening because Starborn especially is going to lose their summoning as well, which is almost their entire identity at this point. Yeah. So you're going to want to give something in return, right? Whereas with Lumineth, I'm kind of sure almost that Venari units are all going to lose their casting abilities. And at that point, when only our heroes are casters, are we still a magic dominant army? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. We haven't seen enough, I guess.
It's also so hard to make a 2 spell lores for Lumineth because you have the Lore of Fish one, which we will get, and then you get one other one maybe, and that would not make sense to just get one other one because those were always linked to the temple. So is that lore now just going to be the lore of the temples, or is it going to be one of the temple lores? I don't know. Some of us are hoping for 3 lores, but that seems very wishful thinking.
Yeah, but the other problem that doesn't really make sense is then if you only can choose one of the, let's say, 3 lores, the regular and then 2 temples, then that means all the, and a Huracan guy can cast the Alarith one and vice versa, and that breaks lore just as much. Exactly. So kind of weird.
Yeah, so I only expect 1 lore for Lumineth.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, that's all the normal kind of battle traits that are going on here with Tzeentch. I feel like it's
one thing I want to point out quickly on the battle traits here, Ryan. Sure. It's a wording on the burning weird flame, so it's once per turn, army, end of any turn. Okay, so that's normal. But then we get a different wording here for the first time in the battle traits here for the D3. So normally, as it has been in the past couple of faction focuses at least, it says roll a D3 on a 2+ blah 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 blah. Now it says on a 2 or 3, inflict an amount of mortal damage on that unit equal to the roll. on a 1, that unit no longer has the burning keyword. So that means the result on the D3, right? So a 1 would be a 1 or 2 on a D6, and a 2 or 3 would be 3 or 2 up to 6 on a D6, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this confirms that it was always, if it said 2+, it meant after converting it to 2 or 3, right? So it's like effectively on a D6 of a 3+.
Well, I would say the opposite actually, but because why wouldn't they phrase it that way here as well then?
Because there's no version of a rule they're ever going to write where they don't talk about all the rolls so you could possibly get on a die. They don't. If this was a D6 roll, like you're reading it as 1 is one thing, 2 to 3 is another. What happened to 4+? They're not going to write a rule that just says half of the chance that you're going to roll something doesn't do anything. They might as well just lumped it in with 1. You see
Yeah.
what I mean?
No, not necessarily. I just don't really see how that makes any difference when you see like rules that say roll D3 on a 2+, inflict that many mortal wounds. You have to convert the D6 afterwards anyway, right? So you might as well have.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think if to be on the same page and just kind of wrap this one up, because if we're not going to know the answer until they write it in the
Yeah.
article. But I'm assuming you're saying on this one, because they said 2 to 3, it's very clear that it's a
super
D3.
clear, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But on the other ones, because they use a different thing, you're thinking that when it said on a 2+, it meant a D6 2+, but then you do an amount of damage equal to a D3.
Yes, and that's only because I don't understand why they would differentiate the wording in this case if it isn't different in the other cases. That's the only reason.
Okay. And what I was saying is that the sample space here, all of the options is represented as a 1, 2, or 3, which is obviously a D3. So that's what I was saying, is that there's no mention of a 4+. So we were talking.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're on the same page. But honestly, I hate that they're doing this, and I wish they would have just released an article already that made it clear.
Yeah, and just use the same wording if it's all the same thing anyway.
Yeah, you could be right that it means two different things, but it's even more counterintuitive if it's not just D3 the whole way through. That one part of the roll is a D6 and one part of the roll is a D3.
I would agree with you that it's better if if it counts as a D3, but why wouldn't they phrase it that way here as well then? Just weird. Anyway, let's move on to the well, do you want to still talk about the battle formation?
No, I mean, because we already mentioned that it's -1 to wound, right? So I mean, I think that's decent, especially if they've got. I mean, it's good for a shooting or melee army, but of course, you can only put the burning keyword on 1 unit per turn. So to get the max out of it, you need to be doing a covering fire in their phase to shoot another unit. So I mean, I don't know. And then how quickly? I don't know how easy it's going to be to heal away the burning. Obviously, every unit that's not in combat is going to rally it off. So that formation might go to waste against someone who's healing all the time. Like let's say against what's a Rockgut Tragus, who are literally healing every turn.
Yeah.
So and not even even if they're in combat. So that would go to waste against a regenerative army like that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at Kairos. Kairos is he's a big boy. He's grown up a little bit. His save got 1 point worse, but he's got a 5-up ward, which he never had a ward at all. So his save on all values of rend is better now, even at no rend, despite the fact that his base save got worse. Let's see. I'm not taking into account all at defense on that. Feeling it's pretty similar, even if you do all at defense, because obviously he can only reach a 4+ max now, and he used to be able to get a 3+. But I still have a feeling this is in almost all situations better. We're not really here to talk about his melee profile, but it's fine. So he is still doing his D6 thing where he matches the lowest D6 to the highest, but this used to say unbinding and dispelling. So it's only for casting, kind of like Nagash is only getting his buff for casting. If you look at the other passive ability in the upper right-hand corner, Beacon of Sorcery, it's +1 to casting and unbinding rolls for friendly disciples of Tzeentch wizards while they're holier than 12, so that affects him. So he's still getting that, but that used to also be for banishing or dispelling. So that fell off a little bit, and it used to be 18-inch bubbles, so it's definitely gotten weakened. The weird thing is the Beacon of Sorcery used to be on all the birds, and usually when we have a rules text that's the same, the italicized flavor text will also be the same. But the flavor text here says Kairos. which makes me think there's a chance that they're not going to change that to the Lord of Change saturates the area with magic, meaning that he might be the only one that's giving a +1 to cast an unbind bubble and not the regular bird. What do you think?
Yeah, when it's about named heroes, so far they've always mentioned their names in the flavor text, right? So I could still see it happening, but then I also do feel like they're trying to get rid of all the +1 on almost all things. So it's I guess at some point I could see them like thinking, okay, so Kairos is very special. We still want to give him the +1, but we want to get rid of it on the normal birds. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
I mean, if you look at Mastery of Magic, it doesn't say Kairos' name. I have a feeling if I had to choose between the two, which one I'd want to keep on my
Oh yeah,
bird,
that's fair. Yeah,
I would keep the D6 one.
yeah.
But okay, let's look at his spell real quick and then come to the like crazy thing. And by the way, he's still a 3-caster, so that's good. His spell is Arcane Suggestion, as we've always known it, which used to be in the Mortal lore. And by being a War Scroll spell, I'm pretty convinced that it's not going to be choosable by anyone but
Yeah,
him. And this was one of the best spells that Tzeentch had
it was.
access
Yeah,
to. And so this means two things. One, this is your only way to get this spell probably, and two, he's lost his mortal wound spell that used to be fair, in the 3rd edition book shared with the other Lord of Change. So maybe the regular Lord of Change kept the doing lots of mortal wounds after rolling 9 dice and you need to hit 3 up or whatever. Maybe that spell's on the regular bird. But in any case, Arcane Suggestion's always been an amazing spell. You choose a target within 18 inches and you choose a modular effect. You can either turn off its command use until the start of your next turn, -1 from hit and wound rolls for its attacks, or -1 from save, and all that is
amazing.
until the next turn. It's an amazing
Yeah,
spell, and now that it's on him, it kind of makes him a bit of an auto take.
yeah.
I mean, he's very valuable, especially once you look at his last ability, which is, I think we had something like this in one of the Dawnbringer Crusade
So
War Scrolls,
cool.
right? Where his lore, for people that don't know, is he's got 2 heads, and he's kind of like a exiled version of a Lord of Change. He knew too much or something like that. I forget exactly how the story goes. And write it up in the comments if someone's really into it. But one of his heads sees the past, and one of the heads sees the future. But he's actually not in the present. Like he doesn't have as good of a insight into the present. So one of these heads is letting him. This is once per battle. When you choose your battle tactic, he can pick a battle tactic you've already attempted. So for those that don't know, you can only attempt each battle tactic once per game, even if you fail it. So this means if you failed it, you get a second shot, or if it's a really easy one and you'd really like to be able to do it twice per game, there you go. The reading the future one is kind of similar. Instead, you still have to follow the normal rules and pick 2 battle tactics that you've not yet attempted, and you still can only complete one of them, even if, as it says here, you actually complete both. But the one that you didn't get off doesn't count as being attempted, so you can attempt it again in future turns. And if you don't complete either one, you can pick which one counts as still being choosable for future turns. This is an amazing ability, especially if Tzeentch has a hard time with battle tactics.
Yeah, it's
I
so
think
good.
yeah, it's and I'm glad it really fits his lore. Like it makes sense. It doesn't feel like they just gave a random ability to some random character, you know?
Yeah, they really did a great job with Kairos. I do feel like all of his abilities are really a manifestation of what Tzeentch is about. You've got the Arcane Suggestion, which is probably the most, you know, the most Tzeentchy spell out there. You have the +1 to cast. You have the D6 casting rolls to match your other D6, and then you now have got that very cool ability where you're kind of changing your fate or playing with your future. And I really think that's a very cool ability, and also super strong, even for once per battle. I mean, I almost every game I'm like, at the end of a game, I'm usually like, okay, so my army is thinned out to the point where I'm almost unable to complete battle tactics. I wish I had kept that easy one, for example. Yeah, this is so strong, and I completely agree with you that it's almost obviously depending on his points, but what we're seeing here, I can hardly imagine a Tzeentch army without Kairos in it.
I mean, I've always loved the guy, and it's good to see that he's still going to mean something. And I'm assuming that most of these abilities aren't on the regular Lord of Change, which is
Yeah.
good that there's not too much overlap. Um, the things he lost are important to note. That he used to, at the start of your hero phase, give you a new Destiny dice if you had less than 9. So that's a bit of a nerf. But I think choosing your battle tactic is way bigger, and has a similar vibe, right? It's like controlling your destiny. Um, and then he also lost his ability, as did probably the other birds, maybe, to be able to take someone's endless spell over,
Yeah.
to steal it. But I honestly, that didn't happen that much. It would be interesting in this edition if we really are going
Yeah.
to see more endless spells.
Uh-huh.
But I still like the war scroll just fine as it is.
Yeah, and the
So
5 plus ward is so nice, such a
oh yeah,
nice quality of life
because the
change.
only other way you used to get that off or have something like that was doing Shield of Fate,
Yeah.
and then that was dependent on the only way you got the 5 up ward was if you had a certain amount of Destiny dice at the moment of casting. So
Yeah.
it's pretty good.
It was always a little bit weird that all demons had this ward save, but the birds didn't.
Which demons had the ward save?
Well, it was such a demon thing, right, to have a ward save, and then a lot of demons didn't have the ward save, and now they're getting it. They're all getting it one. It
Yeah, yeah.
seems.
I'd hope that all the greater demons would get something. I
Yeah.
mean, they're supposed to feel godlike, you
Yeah.
know.
Exactly.
So, all right, so let's move on to our next boy. We got 3 heroes, by the way, in this reveal. I've been a Gaunt Summoner stan for a while, especially for how he was used in an Eternal Conflict deep striking list. And from my interpretation of what they did with this War Scroll, they only just made it even stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't really care. He does more damage on his profiles, kind of, but that's not really what you're here for. There is a disc version, and I'm curious to see if he's just on a disc and that's all that changes, or if he's actually like a total different function than this guy. But this is the foot version, and the Silver Tower rule used to let you put 2 guys. I always thought of it as putting them inside the Gaunt Summoner, but that's not what the lore is. The lore is every one of the 9 Gaunt Summoners is like the kind of ruler of a silver tower that's kind of like the spaceshipy Tzeentch thing, and then he would just like put them in deep strike up in the silver tower. Well, now it says, so what it used to do is put 2 units in the guy, and at the end of your movement phase, he would let them step out wholly within 9 inches, and outside of 9 inches of him, and then outside of 9 of the opponent. And it had to be Tzeentch units that weren't monsters. They were like restrictions. Well, now he can put any friendly unit, put anything in this dude's tower. He's just open to everything now. He's a
Yeah.
big old swinger. And then the thing, if I'm reading this right, because it doesn't say once per deployment phase, I think you can put an unlimited number of guys in this guy's silver tower.
Mm-hmm.
Which seems kind of weird. He could be your only guy that's on the battlefield, and
Yeah.
then you just deploy them. And now, of course, if they shoot him dead, the target units do have to be coming up around him. So if he's gone, then well, you're screwed. Now, also, it's worth pointing out if you have 2 of these guys, it's not in his silver tower;
Exactly.
it's
That's what
in
I was
our
gonna
silver
say. Yeah.
tower. So then you could have a redundancy option. You used to have to keep track of who was in which silver tower.
Mm-hmm.
And they come outside. They've got plus 3 inches on their deployment range. It used to be 9, so now it's 12. 9 is, of course, the Tzeentch number. So 12 is less lore wise, but of course better. And then his spell used to be like an anti-horde spell, but now it changes his setup range to 18, so double what it used to be, and it can be set up outside 7 of enemy units, which, if we've got some good melee units, is pretty strong, and definitely for an internal conflag build where you're trying to get everything in target range and have more choice of what you're shooting at. It's I think this could be really strong. What are your thoughts on the Gaunt Summoner?
Yeah, it all depends on the use. I mean, it depends on how good the melee units are, or maybe like flamers or something have a very short range now. That might also be the case. That
Could
you
be.
actually need this guy to get them into range. I sincerely hope not, but yeah, the fact that you're able to put whatever you want into this guy's silver tower is nice. Um, I wouldn't really necessarily put my entire army in his silver tower, but yeah, a unit or 2 or maybe even 3 just to keep him safe is so nice, so good. And you can protect this guy pretty easily now anyway, because you've got a guarded hero ability where you can't really target him outside of 12 inches. So yeah, and he has six apart.
Yeah, that's new. The guarded hero, of course, only works if there's a unit standing near him, right? So you have to have something else on the field to protect him. And then the other thing is he used to have his own +1 to cast, dispel, and unbind, but that's gone now. And he used to know the whole mortal lore, but of course, that Tzeentch does have 2 lores now, so it could have been a thing they would have done. But obviously, if you pick a lore, everyone knows everything. So he's still a 2-caster though. So I think this guy is actually very tactically interesting, and I'm just curious to see how he interacts not only with the types of units you could put in his tower, including maybe allies or coalition if that's a thing, but also how how the one on disc works. If it's just a faster version of this for more points, then okay. But it'd be kind of cool if it does a different thing. So, okay, you got anything else to say about this boy?
No, just something that I've been wondering for a while now with armies that have a lot of wizards with big power levels. You've got Kairos on 3, this guy on 2. You have a couple of other wizards that have 2 casts or 3 casts. And it used to be the case where with Tzeentch lists you brought a lot of heroes. So now if you're only selecting still 1 lore of 3 spells, are your heroes ever gonna run out of things to cast, even with the free endless spells?
I mean, we still don't know 100% what kind of universal lore that all wizards know. It could be Stick Shield and Bolt if that's still the thing. So then there would be those 2. And like you said, the endless spells. And unfortunately, he's got a war spell, and so does Kairos. So not having a war scroll spell, I think, extra begs the question that you just asked. But I mean, one of those 2 spells is probably always going to be this. And the other thing that kind of leads or comes from your question too is like a lot of Tzeentch armies, because of the summoning rules, used to take as many casts as possible so they could trigger as many successful spells and therefore fate points. And now that's not a thing anymore. So you got to like retrain yourself to think, I don't need to load up on the most efficient guy who can just shoot something into the sky just so I get a fate point.
Yeah, and there's just very little damaging spells being shown in this article, which was also something that Tzeentch was very good at, right? You just brought a ton of heroes and they had so much damage from ranged.
It sounds like they might be switching to making the units more.
Yeah, like maybe they're it's a project we've seen with other armies as well, right? You now bring a mix of arms, like you bring some range for the Weird Flame, you bring some melee with this guy maybe to get them into range easier. It's interesting. I kind of like the fact that Tzeentch has to play more aggressively now, whereas before you just huddled behind your horrors and shot everyone down with your mortal wound spells.
Yeah,
it's definitely more interactive.
Yeah. I guess before we move on this guy, he also lost like weird game hero slaying ability, but I don't know if I ever got it all in all the times I played with him. It was a very niche-y rule. Like if he did some amount of damage to them, I don't remember exactly how it worked, but that's gone. So I mean, I think if you had to pick something to take off his war scroll, that's an easy giving up. All right, let's look at the Curseling. Now the Curseling is he's always been our unbind guy, a 2-level caster with actually a really good save for Tzeentch at a 3-up. He got 1 extra point of health, which makes him even more tanky, I guess. And he was one of our most efficient guys you would take if you were trying to raise your spell casting option so you could get more fate points, because he was a 2-caster for a decent price, and then would stick around. For Guild of Summoners, he was, which I guess we don't have any, I assume. So I don't know why I have 4 birds anymore. But for Guild of Summoners, he was an Arcanite hero, summon around him, which is one of the restrictions. And he was also a great target as a mortal guy, could take Arcane Suggestion or Cult Demagogue, the command trait, or the what's the other one I'm forgetting? The one that increased his range by 9 inches. This was just a kind of jack of all trades, and the fact that he could unbind in every, he had rerolls to unbinding, and then if he successfully unbound a spell in the opponent's turn, he got to cast his own spell, which meant you got the kind of you didn't get a fate point from their spell, but you got to deny it at the same time while still getting a chance to cast your own spell, which
Yeah.
was on a casting value 4, which almost always went off, and then you could steal someone else's spell, which basically was giving you an extra fate point. And you could do it as many times as he had unbinds. So, like in this current season, if he got an extra unbind because he was an Antorian acolyte, you got 3 unbinds with this dude. Plus, if you're in Host Arcanum right now on battle rounds 1, 3, and 5, you got an auto unbind, so it was guaranteed to go off. So he was just this really great utility unit. And so let's take a look at what's changed here. His profiles are roughly the same, but his passive ability, instead of doing what I just described about unbinding, it says each time he unbinds a spell on a 4-up, you subtract 1 from the power level of the enemy wizard that used that spell ability to a minimum of 0 until the start of your next turn. So if it's in the normal phase when they would be casting, so their hero phase, if it was a 1-level wizard, then it has no impact except that until the start of your next hero phase, they can't do any magic stuff either. You basically make sure they're not doing a counter or what magical intervention or whatever. They could still unbind, of course. No, it reduces their power levels, right? So that means they don't have an unbind anymore. So he steals that away. And then, of course, if they do it in your turn, or if they do it in their normal turn and they're like a 2-level wizard, then it's obvious what they do. They do all of what I just said, plus you subtracted 1 from it, which means I guess that means, what does that mean? Like if they say they're a 2-level wizard, they just cast a spell, so they used one of their things, and you subtract it, so it goes down to 1. Do they still get to cast their second spell?
Yeah.
You get what I mean? Because now it says they have a casting level of 1, but they already cast 1 this turn. So does it check for what you've already done, or does it? I'm assuming it does, right?
Probably, yeah. So they probably wouldn't be able to cast their second spell. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they have 1 less unbind for next turn. So definitely interesting. What do you think about this as someone who's interacting with, spell a lot?
It's fine. I think it'll be less useful to reduce the amount of casts from your opponent because there's not that many 2 power level wizards around. Usually in an army, you might have 2 wizards maybe, but usually they would have 1 cast anyway, and then this ability is kind of useless when you're trying to reduce their casting potency at least. But it's very nice as a casting army yourself that you're not gonna be faced with as many unbinds as you normally would. So there's this weird interaction where, as an opponent, you might actually want to hold off casting just to be sure that you've got an unbind to block a strong spell from the Tzeentch player.
Yeah, I mean, he still has to successfully unbind.
And then a roll of 4+, so yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the 4+ is a little brutal here.
Yeah, it's brutal, yeah.
But he does get 2 shots at this every turn if you want to let him do his unbinding instead of doing a magical intervention himself, which I think you would with this guy, right? He would, if you're going to leave one guy back, this is the guy to leave back. And then if they do a magical intervention on your turn, then they take a double. Then that wizard's going to be affected by this, not only for the rest, for their first turn, but then they take a double and then they lose it for that turn as well. So that's when you get the most value out of this, is if they do a magical intervention and then take a double on you. Anyway, his spell is what used to be in the mortal lore, if I'm not mistaken, that made the caster. I think it's the same thing, but now it's stuck to this guy. So he's adding 1. Well, it's not the same thing. It used to add. Let's hold on. +1 to hit and wound for that hero that cast it, and now it's giving him +1 rend and damage. The thing is, I don't know how much he's going to need this spell. Like, are you really trying to get this guy into combat? And it doesn't improve his output by enough because he's still hitting on 4s and 4s. Hitting and wounding on 4s and 4s. So I feel like this is maybe the weirdest target to give this spell.
It's such a strange spell for this guy. It's very, very weird.
I think it should have been on the Ogre Thorn, because he actually looks like he wants to be in combat.
Yeah, or it should have affected his ranged weapon.
Sure, that would be interesting. Yeah, it's just a weird. Yeah, and the Infusion Arcanum was something. But
you dropped off there. It was something.
Yeah. It was the spell when it was in the mortal lore was something we didn't use a whole lot anyway, but at least because it was takeable by anyone, you could have chosen the best melee fighter, and I don't know that he was the guy you'd be choosing. So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, it is
It's
what it is.
weird. Yeah, it,
Yeah.
it really depends whether there's going to be enough units that he could accompany.
Yeah, I mean he's a two caster, so this is I just said that thing about what's it called, the War Scroll spell, helping you get around the running out of spells to cast. But the problem is this guy, you're never going to cast this just to get a fate point because that doesn't exist anymore. And then I guess you could do it as like a magical intervention. Well, I got a little bit more damage, I guess.
Yeah.
I think he'd probably lean more towards the unlimited spell plus maybe an endless spell or something, whatever the Tzeentch unlimited spell ends up being. I don't know if we've seen that yet. So anyway, weird, but I don't know if this guy's as much of he does have the weird flame rule, by the way. So this is an example of a hero with that ability.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something. I agree with you. If they had, especially with the weird flame rule, if they'd given him,
Yeah, that would have just been much cooler, I think.
yeah, and it would have worked with the new ability.
Yeah.
So, okay, pink horrors. Oh boy, what a change.
Yep.
Um,
Well, it's the Lord of Change, the God of Change. So
Fair enough. And this unit's been frustrating to Tzeentch players and non-Tzeentch players alike for quite a
yeah.
long time. So for those that don't know, basically when you took an expensive unit of horrors, so 10 for 260 points at the current value, you got 10 guys, and then when they each of the pinks died, you would put 2 blues on the table to replace each of the pinks. So it went from a unit of 10 to 20, and then every time a blue model died, it got replaced with a single model that represented 2 different brimstone horrors. So it's like they split again.
Mm-hmm.
But it still was the same model count. So you went from 10 to 20 to 20, and they only counted as dying when the brims died. So it was basically like the spirit of these guys split into 2 different models and then moved on to another model. And it was just kind of a tar pit unit. It never really had a great save. It used to have this 6+ with a +1 to save as long as you had like the banner, I think it was, or the musician, one or the other.
Yeah.
And then the other one was giving you a fate point on a 3+ at the start of your hero phase, but of course that doesn't exist anymore. Now, evidently, so first off, they are still tanky in a sense because they got double the amount of health. So each pink does count as 20, or each unit of 10 pinks does count as 20 wounds instead of 50. And now, how it used to work is before the game, you had to choose the split version or the petty vengeance version, and you never chose the petty vengeance except maybe if you summoned a unit and it was the last turn or something.
Yeah.
Where they do some mortal wounds when they go away. But now you can choose every time you pull a model. You can choose. Now this is interesting because they don't directly turn into blues and brims on their own. There has to be evidently blue horrors and brim horrors are one unit now, and they start as blues and then turn into brims, just like probably the old system.
Yeah.
And what happens now is they only return 2 slain blue horror models to that unit, assuming that unit has taken some damage. And that unit has to be within 12, not wholly, of this unit. So what I'm thinking is maybe you put a screen up of blues and let them kind of be your chaff unit, and they start getting knocked down in unit count. And then once maybe you get them out of the way or something, or somehow they start pulling some pinks, and then you can start returning those blues. Now, interestingly, you can return models to these units now. They used to not be able to rally or take any other way of bringing models back. But I don't really know how useful this is going to be, because if your screen is there, then they just don't shoot the pinks, so you can't blue or shoot or target them in any other way, so that you can't add blues and brims back. And then they only get to use the petty vengeance rule if they're within combat of that the pink that dies or whatever,
Yeah.
or the unit. And I don't know. I don't really get how this is going to play out. Do you have a better sense of what this will look like?
No, it's such a weird change, and I say this as someone that really hated pink horrors for such a long time. So I'm always glad that they seem completely useless, but I never want something to be completely useless. So what I can see happening is basically what you said. I can see maybe running 2 screens of 20 blues in front of these guys, and then once these guys start dying, they can start adding on to the blues. But then every decent opponent is gonna target your blues first, right, and try to kill them completely before they get to the pinks. So
Yeah.
it's very strange. I also really don't like that since the split rule is now nerfed quite heavily. I do feel like the petty vengeance could be a little bit stronger. I don't really know why it should be on a 4+.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just feels a little bit uncalled for to just keep it as weak as it is, and then what's the point of this unit? I don't understand. They only have 12 range on their attack, so they're gonna be kindly useless, hitting on 4s, winning on 4s. So is it just to pop Weird Flame once? Assuming the blue horrors will also have Weird Flame, and they still split into Brimstone horrors, maybe. I would probably only take blues.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a weird shift. I mean, I like if they make them a lot cheaper, then I think we start to have a conversation about this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and especially with the units having different functions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, there's a version of reality where you don't even work for brim horror units. You just let them do the mortal wounds as they die, which is on average 5, of course, per unit.
Yeah.
That's something, I guess. I think you're mainly taking a point for as screens and or for the weird flame, which the profile changed. They used to have 3 attacks on the shooting profile, but it was a 5 to hit, and ultimately the math is better on this. And then especially combined with the new weird flame rules, they might be doing some extra mortals. I don't know. I don't have a good sense. They do have a 6+ ward now, which evidently seems to be a demon thing for Tzeentch,
Mm-hmm.
like you were saying. So who knows? I don't know. I think it depends on how the rest of the army plays out, but that's been true of all these faction focuses. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, that's the main article, and then they just talk about kind of how they're um, what they're doing with the rest of the army a little bit and what the spirit of the army is. But we go on to look at Kyric acolytes, you're kind of your typical old casters, and this seems to indicate this is their war scroll, their spearhead war scroll. It seems to indicate because they've got a spell that's in your shooting phase. It says casting roll that they're still going to be wizards, which might be an indication that your sentinels and wardens are in Lumineth are still going to be wizards. What did their I haven't looked at it really. What did their spearhead war scroll look like?
Yeah, this is super strange because we didn't see anything about that on their war scrolls. There wasn't even a spell on the Cathalar.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
this is very, very strange to me. I think there's actually no casting, and they just call it a casting roll, but it's just a roll of 2d6.
No, but this is the wording that they're using spearhead for the magister as well.
Hmm.
They just said that because there is no magic
There's
module
no
in
magic module.
spearhead.
Yeah, exactly.
This
Yeah.
it's just an ability on a war scroll. So
So maybe it's just for fluffy reasons that it's a casting roll, but it's just you rolling 2d6s.
no, I think this is a spell. Like because I mean, this is exactly what they've always had. I mean, we'll know when we see war scroll, so there's no reason
Yeah,
going back.
I understand that's a spell. It's just like the ability on the Cathalar's War Scroll. It's also obviously her spell, but it's not worded as such because there is no spell. So I understand why they're calling it a casting roll, and I also understand that it's probably gonna become a spell in the standard match play version. I'm just saying that they left the casting roll wording in here for fluff reasons. That's the only thing I'm saying.
Yeah, but it could also be that the Catholic just has a static ability. It
Yeah,
does. Maybe
maybe.
that she's got a different spell. Have we seen the full version of the War Scroll or just
No,
the Spearhead version?
just
Okay.
spear,
So
just
I
spearhead.
mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to know with those things, but interesting. This is basically what it used to do.
Mm-hmm.
This spell it just makes them, except that they can't stack it. If this wording stays in the regular game, they can't stack it on each other. It used to be a build that you could have like all the Kyrics that are
Yeah.
standing near each other stack it onto one big block of 30 or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. And considering that Kyrics are no longer um, generating fate points, which was kind of like a great cheap battle line option for also helping you with your fate points as long as they had 9 or more models. You know, uh, I have no idea how these guys are going to function, and it just depends on their points value and how they stack up against the other options you can take. Is there's no battle line anymore, so you don't have to take them. So there's going to have to be a good reason to do so.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what that's going to look like. But yeah, who knows? These Spearhead War Scrolls are kind of misleading sometimes, so I'm not taking too much of a read on these guys. Like trying to get too much of a sense for what's actually going to be in the index.
Yeah. So how are you feeling about Tzeentch now, Ryan?
I
Because
mean,
it's
we've seen,
probably one of your favorite armies, right?
well, I mean, I'm sad about probably what's going to happen to yes, armies. Sad about what's going to happen to Guild of Summoners.
Yeah.
Because I just thought that was so cool. But honestly, they've had more time in the sun than I ever expected they would. It's been a popular build, like a meta build actually
Yeah.
within the tournament. So unfortunately, I don't like playing meta builds, so it kind of turned off for me. But and obviously they're leaning into the Eternal Flag stuff, so I'm pretty happy about that. Um, I don't know. I mean, I think Tzeentch came from what we've seen thus far is coming out decently on top compared to some of the other factions we've seen
Yeah.
and how they've changed. And it's just an index. I fully expect Battle Tomes to get much more detailed once they get their real books. So I think for the start of the edition, it looks totally fine, and it just depends on if this is nerfing people's desire to play that army. I've seen some people posting whole Gits armies on Facebook for sale just because I think they they think that one nerf to the squig herd is enough to make them not want to. That it means all the squigs are going to suck or whatever. And I don't know if I agree with that. So I think it's too early to say, but I like this content. I think it looks pretty good. What are you thinking as someone who plays against them all the time?
I'm so happy that I'm not gonna get punished for casting spells anymore as an opponent to Tzeentch.
Sure.
I cannot tell you how much I hated playing against this solely because of that reason. That I love casting my spells. And I'm like, I'm getting punished for casting a spell here. A simple one, and it always had me like mull it over. Is it even worth casting this spell? I just don't really like thinking about my army that way. Like things that identified as a very big part of the Lumineth army felt like something that I could not do at all because of Tzeentch. So I'm glad that's gone. I think if I was a Tzeentch player, I would be happy that um, the major importance of summoning is also gone. It's cool that there's still some summoning around in one shape or form, but I didn't necessarily enjoy it as much with Seraphon, for example, where I had to completely focus and attune my build to summoning. Whereas now, probably I'm going to have to bring a mixed arms attachment and at least participate in all phases of the game, which overall is much more fun both for me and my opponent. I think the same will go for Tzeentch.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I especially in this Magic season, I really either you had to kind of do a very specific build or you just had to not play Tzeentch competitively.
Yeah, exactly.
And this seems like they're trying with a lot of the armies, to be fair, trying to diversify them so that there are more builds that are interesting. And we'll see what the rest looks like. I'm again as an internal conflict player, that's immediately where I'm going with this. So I'm ready to get started with Tzeentch again. It looks cool.
Yeah, I'm also really feeling like I talked to Michael, who's the resident Tzeentch player in Antwerp.
Yeah.
um, he's really expecting the Flamers to pop off. So and you are as well, actually. So
I mean, they were good right away from the third edition book until save stacking got out of hand.
yeah,
Um, and I actually tabled someone not too long ago with that list, even in the Magic edition. So they still have some juice, but eh, you know, it would be nice if they got a new kit.
yeah,
Like the models are kind of ugly,
they
and
really are. Yeah.
and even I, who am not a good painter, am disappointed with how uninspiring those models were. I was just like, oh, okay.
Damn.
The exalted
Okay.
flamers are okay, but the flamers themselves, it's just like, oh. So I would totally buy a new set of those,
Yeah.
um, just to have a prettier model on the table. Anyway, all right, let's wrap this one up. Hey guys, for all the Zeech heads out there, I hope you guys like these changes, haha, and especially I think everyone's happy probably with Kairos.
Yeah,
I
get
hope,
your Kairoses now if you haven't already.
yeah. So, guys, thanks again for following us on this journey as we go through all these faction focuses. The next one up is Ogre Maw Tribes. Jonas, you want to say anything while we check out here?
Yeah, guys, enjoy your casting and don't be too bummed out or burned out because you're gonna set everything aflame soon. So
Here we go. Here we go. All right, let's see if we can get as good of dad jokes out in the ogres video. All right, guys. Until next time, Ryan and Jonas out.